up, Domino community? Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode where I talk about how I am making my best domino project yet. Now, in this episode, I'm going to be going over how I've created this huge Octowall. This came together in kind of a long process. Now, I knew that I wanted to make a giant structure on top of the fireplace because I needed to fill up space as much as I could, and if there's a ledge that's attached to my wall, I am of course going to build on that ledge. So I was like, all right, I need to build a structure, but I also want this to be really cool. Like, this isn't just going to be a structure, you know, it needs to be more than that. Every time I think of a simple idea for this project, I need to take that and just bump it up a little bit more each time. So the first problem with a general wall is, you know, the normal wall technique, it's kind of overused. Like, okay, maybe it's not overused, but it's a very common trick, and I wanted to kind of do a different structure technique that I hadn't done in a really long time. And in fact, I'm actually not sure if I've ever made an Octowall by myself. The last time I can think of one was the first collab that I did with Dominoes with the fire colored ending structure, but I don't think I've ever made one on my own. So this was definitely the opportunity to do something cool. The normal wall technique also isn't that sturdy when you're building super tall, and I really wanted to fill as much space as I could vertically, and the Octowall, because it has 4 dominoes in each pillar, it makes the structure much more stable. So it was kind of a win-win where I could build something that I wasn't really as used to building and be more exciting for me to set up a really big wall, and it's actually more stable. So win-win, very happy about that. So because I've actually never really built an Octowall on my own before, I decided before I even started to do a really small test. So I just did a really quick Octowall and knocked it down, and it worked perfectly. So once I got that out of the way, I knew I could just start building the big structure. I knew the test would work. I don't know why I did a test, but if I'm making a structure that big, I want to make sure that it is indeed going to fall. So I don't regret making that little test. After that, I needed to decide which colors to use for this wall. And I have a thing for fire colors versus like cool ice colors. I just love the hot and cold sort of balance, and like I use this a lot. For example, the Amazing Triple Spiral. We do this a lot in the MAC. I don't know, something about red versus blue. It just looks so cool. So I was like, okay, I'm definitely using hot and cold colors in some way. How do I use these colors to make a really awesome design? And I decided that like I didn't want to do a wall plan for this. I thought about doing some really cool like complicated piece of artwork, or spelling out some words in a very fancy font, like really making this a super detailed wall, but you know, that would just take way too long to build. And to be honest, I'm really not a fan of wall plans. I just kind of find it boring to build, and part of the challenge for me is making a structure that I can kind of figure out on the spot. So that's what made this project in particular really fun to build. It was kind of a design as you go kind of thing. So knowing these colors, I kind of had to figure out how is the color going to arrange in this wall. So we have, if we go on the hot color scale, we have red, that's the hottest color, and we have orange, gold, and yellow. On the other side, we have dark blue, normal blue, lighter blue, and then a very light blue. Now we have 8 shades of colors, 4 gradations of each hot and cold, and with that I had to figure out how to arrange this in a design. I started making a weird, very DIY quote-unquote wall plan using the colors of the dominoes. So I knew using these colors there had to be some sort of gradation. So I started laying out the flat dominoes on my table, just kind of arranging them. What I thought was you could either have the gradation go from left to right, or you can have it go from top to bottom. I thought about doing the gradation from top to bottom as like the red kind of meshing into the blue, but the problem was the way that the Octowall is built, it doesn't really lend itself to vertical gradations as well as it could the other direction. And what I mean by that is if I were to make the first 3 rows red and then maybe the next 3 gray rows are orange on top of that, it kind of hides the shape of the Octowall. And I didn't want to do that. Like, I kind of like seeing each individual pillar. That's what makes this structure unique. It's made out of pillars rather than like square modules. So I decided to make each pillar one color for just consistency, and so you can really highlight that pillar in the structure. And that meant that the gradation would have to go from left to right instead of top to bottom. So I thought about this some more, and I actually made some sketches in my notebook. To be honest, I don't really sketch out a lot of things when I'm designing, but I was kind of inspired by my Dominoes to just take out some paper and doodle a little and see what these possibilities could be. So I varied the height of the pillars. I thought it'd be cool to have some sort of like abstract like wave of pillars, because if I made them all the same height, it just wouldn't really be as interesting, I feel like. And I also thought it'd be cool to have some sort of space in the middle between the hot and cold colors to sort of separate them a little bit more. And I played around with a random assortment of heights and a random amount of space in between the middle, as well as maybe doing a more linear height for the wall. So maybe it could start with a really small amount of blue, a really big amount of red, and then as it gets to the top, on the top right corner, there would be like more blue on the right side and then less red on the top right side. I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically it's like gradually increasing blue and then gradually decreasing red. But then I thought, like, it's almost too perfect. Like, I feel like I could do way more than that. Also, one thing I realized about the structure itself is that it's really hard to make a diagonal line within the structure because it repeats every 4 layers, and the way that you look at each domino, every domino is placed on a very different angle. There's 4 different angles, so depending on how you're looking at the structure, it's hard to make any kind of like specific line in it. But I realized once I started building that because the structure repeats every 4 layers and then there's like a little connection piece in between pillars, it's actually easier to make it more of an abstract kind of design and have it flow up and down at various levels that within the 4 layers of each repeated pattern. Once I started building, I realized that the structure itself needed to be built not on the edge. Typically, when I'm building a normal domino wall, at least, everything has to be really precise. But for an Octowall, it actually doesn't need to be that precise. Like, it would be fine if I put a domino a little bit off on an angle, just because it's so structurally sound already. It doesn't really need to be perfect, and I really liked that a lot. I felt like I didn't need to pay attention too much to the precision of it, and I could just focus on building and making a cool design, which I really appreciated in this. So I started out by laying out the entire base first with all of the colors in the blue cold section of the domino wall. One thing that kind of bugged me a little was that it didn't repeat exactly every 4 just because of the length of my fireplace, but that's okay. I had to cut it off by a few colors, but you can't really notice. As I built up, I realized I could actually make the design go up by 1 layer as it increased 1 layer left and right. So I could kind of make it look like mountains going up and down. Or it actually reminded me of statistics, like having a stat go up and then it decreases. So once I had most of the base done, I decided it would be kind of cool to have like a pattern that goes in between the lower colors of those cool blues and then the hot colors above it. So eventually I decided it would be really cool to have like some sort of floating line in between it. So I put a layer of clear and then 1 layer of black and then 1 layer of clear on top of that to kind of sandwich it and have this one thin black line just run through the entire wall. And I think that looks super cool because it's kind of like floating in a way. That color combination also took a while to get to. Originally I thought it was just going to be a black line, but that didn't really look that good. And then I thought maybe a gray gradation, like black to gray to white, but then I was like, nah, that just seems so dark compared to the light bright colors of the other walls. Yeah, the clear and black looked really nice. So I varied the height of the walls, and the connection point between pillars had to be using the black dominoes. So every time it changes the height and it reaches an inflection point, that's within a layer of 4. So yeah, I just continued building that like this. It was pretty relaxing building this. I was just listening to some podcasts on the way. I really enjoyed building this project. One thing that's cool to note about it is that the more intense colors from the hot and cold are on the same pillar. So we have the dark blue and the red, which are like the pure cool colors and the pure hot colors. And then slowly as you move more towards the lighter colors, the orange matches the normal blue, which is kind of like the same ground of intensity. And then the gold is this more lighter blue shade, and then eventually the yellow, which is a little more muted of a hot color, is matched up with the very, very light blue color in the cold section. So that's kind of how this whole wall came to be. The connection point I had to anticipate because I needed to leave room to add a string to it. So that's what I did. It was very kind of sketchy to do this, but maybe I'll explain this in the next episode because this is getting pretty long. Oh man. There we go. The Octowall is done. I really do hope you enjoyed listening and watching this podcast kind of style video. Let me know, have you ever made an octo wall before? And how do you plan your walls? Do you enjoy planning them, or do you kind of just make it up on the spot? Like, what does your process look like when you're making a domino setup? I would love to hear your thoughts, and we can all learn from each other and discuss below in the comments. I want to give a shout out to Chuck Hall for being our featured community member of this video. Thank you, Chuck. It's great to have your support here. Thank you again, and as always, I'm Lily Hevish, and keep mod building.